Once upon a time there was a woman in Ireland who had a son named Jack. Their farm was very small, and their crops one year were very poor. And the mother said, "Jack, I don't know what in the world we'll do at all." And Jack said, "Don't worry, Mother. I'll go out in the world and I'll push my fortune, and when I meet it, believe me, I'll come back and share it with you. Bake me a bannock and cut me a collop and give me your blessing, and off I'll go." So she baked him a bannock and cut him a collop, gave him her blessing, and away he went, one foot in front of the other down the road. On his way he was passing a bog, and he saw a wee donkey caught in the mud. And he went over and threw rocks into the mud until the donkey was able to get his footing and climb out. And the beast said to him, "Now you saved my life. I'll go with you. Wherever you're going, I'll go with you and I'll help you." And Jack said, "That's fine. I'll be glad of your company." And on they went. Well, they had to go through a town, and there were some boys teasing a dog. They had tied a kettle to his tail, and they were chasing him. And the dog ran up to Jack, and Jack told the boys to run away. And he took the kettle off the dog's tail, and the beast said to him, "I don't know who you are, but you saved my life. And where are you and the donkey going?" Jack said, "We're going out into the world to seek our fortune. Do you want to come with us?" And the dog said, "Indeed, I do." So off they went. They hadn't gone very far when they saw a cat sitting on a post of a fence, howling to high heaven. And Jack stopped and said, "What in the world is the matter with you?" And the cat said, "You wouldn't believe it if I told you. All of my life I've caught rats on a farm near here, and now because my teeth are failing me and I can't catch them anymore, they've put me out to starve." And Jack said, "Oh, don't mind that. Come along with us now and we'll take care of you." So the cat joined the company. And on they went down the road, making a fine procession, and they saw a rooster beating his wings in the tall grass. And Jack stopped and said, "What are you doing in there? You will break your wings." And the rooster said, "I'm trying to hide. They're going to cook me for their dinner, and here I've wakened them every morning of my life. They never had to have a clock in that house, and the ingrates are going to eat me for supper. I heard them talking about it. So I'm hiding from them." And Jack said, "Come out of that with you, and come along with us. We're going out to seek our fortune." So he lifted the little rooster out of the tall grass, and he put him up on the donkey's back, and away they went. After a while, they sat down, and Jack shared his bread and his meat with those of the animals that wanted some of it. And they went along, talking together and wondering what would become of them. When evening came, they found themselves in a wood, and they decided to stay there for the night. And Jack and the dog and the donkey settled down at the base of a tree, and the rooster and the cat climbed up to the top branch. It was along in the middle of the night when the rooster began to crow, and he wakened Jack. And Jack said, "You, rooster, what do you mean by waking me up?" And the rooster said, I see a light ahead of us. I thought it was the sun. I'm sorry if I wakened you, but let's go and see what that is." So Jack wakened the rest of the company, and they made their way toward the light. And when they got there, they found it was a cottage, and Jack looked in at the window, and there was a band of robbers sitting around a table having a great feast. And he listened for a moment, and he heard the leader of them say, "Now, wasn't that a fine haul we made? 7 bags of gold and silver. And the Lord of the Manor wouldn't miss it at all. Oh, if it hadn't been for that porter at the gate who let us in, we never would have got it." So Jack went back to his friends and he said, "Here's our fortune." And he told them what to do. They came up close to the house very quietly, and the donkey put his front feet on the windowsill, and the dog climbed up on his back and rested his front paws on the donkey's head. The cat climbed up on the dog's head, and the rooster sat on top of the cat. And when Jack gave them the signal, they let out their loudest bray and bark and yowl and crow, while Jack was shouting, "Level your pistols now! Level your pistols at them!" And when the robbers heard that, they took fright and they ran out the back door, leaving their treasure and all of their food. So Jack and his friends went into the house, and they made themselves a good meal, and they put out the lights and settled down to sleep. The cat by the fire, the rooster up on the rafters, the dog by the door, and the donkey out in the stable. The robbers ran until they were out of breath, and then they sat down to take counsel together, and the captain said, "I wonder who that was that frightened us off. I think I'll go back and see." And the other said, "Oh, that's a good man. You go now." So the leader went back, and he found the house dark. He went in. He went toward the fire to get a light, and he stepped on the cat's tail. Well, she jumped at him and clawed him and screeched at him and frightened him. He ran toward the door, and he kicked the dog, and the dog bit him. And just then the rooster flew down from the rafters and landed on his head and scratched him and beat him with his wings. And the robber was terribly frightened. He ran out and found himself near the stable, and the donkey kicked him, and he landed on the dung heap. Oh, when he came to his senses, he got up and he went back to his companions in the wood, and he said, "Oh, that place is bewitched. There was an old woman carding wool at the fire, and look what she did to me with her cards. My face is scratched. There was a cobbler in there, and he poked me with his awls. And the devil himself was in the house. He lit on my head, and he scratched me, and he beat me with his wings. And I went outside, and I don't know what hit me. Something is in the stable. I'll not go back to that place." And his companions said, "We'll take your word for it. We'll not go near it either." So they went away from there. Well, in the morning, Jack woke up and he looked around and he saw the treasure that belonged to the lord of the manor. And he gathered it all into saddlebags and he put it on the donkey's back, and he took his friends with him, and he said, "Now come, we'll go and return this to the owner." And they made their way to the castle of the lord of the manor, and they were stopped at the gate by the porter. And he said, "You raggedy vagabond, do you think you're coming into this grand house?" And Jack said, "We're coming in. We want to see the lord of the manor. We want to tell him that somebody let the robbers into his house last night." Well, the master himself was listening at a window, and he came down to the gate to see what the controversy was. And he said to the porter, "What is this I hear about the robbers who were let in? Who let them in?" And the porter said, "I don't know, it wasn't I. I wouldn't let 6 robbers in here." And Jack said, "Aha, how did you know there were 6 of them?" And so the porter broke down and confessed that yes, he had let them in. And Jack said, "Don't worry about it, master. Look, here is all of your treasure returned." So the lord of the manor took Jack in, and Jack said, "If you take me, you must take my friends too." And the man agreed to that. The donkey had the most comfortable stall in the stable. The rooster had free run of the hen yard. The dog had a comfortable place by the fire, and the cat was free to come and go as he chose. The lord of the manor decided that he needed a steward, and Jack should be that steward. And Jack said, that's fine. I'll be your steward, and I'll be a good one. But I must get my mother and bring her here too. So the lord of the manor sent back for Jack's mother, and he brought her to the castle to live, and they all settled down and lived happily ever after. Once upon a time there was a king in Leinster who had a favourite storyteller. Every night the storyteller was required to have a new tale for the king's entertainment. And in exchange for this, the storyteller and his wife were given a very comfortable house and horses and a chariot and hounds to hunt with. One morning, the storyteller woke up and he was in great distress. His wife said to him, "Come now and eat your breakfast." He said, "Oh, I couldn't touch a thing. My mind has gone blank. I can't think of a story for the king tonight, and what'll I do?" She said, "Let us drive in our chariot. Maybe something will come to you." So they started out, and they were up high on a hill, and she looked down, and she said, "What's that black thing down there in the meadow?" And the storyteller said, "I don't know. We'll go see." So they drove down, and here was an old raggedy beggar man, sitting playing a game with himself, one hand against the other. And the storyteller stopped, and he said, "Who are you, and what are you doing?" The old man said, "Oh, I'm nobody. I'm a man who's poor today and rich tomorrow because I love to gamble. Would you play a game with me?" The storyteller said, "I would. What'll we play for?" The old man said, "Well, I have a bag of money here. We'll play for that." So the storyteller took the dice and threw them. And then the old man threw them, and he won all the storyteller's money. He said, "Well, now, would you play again?" And the storyteller said, "What have I to play with?" "Oh, you have your horse and your chariot, your house and your hounds." So they played again, and again the storyteller lost. And the old man said, "Ah, would you play again?" The storyteller said, "What have I to play with?" "Well, you have your wife." "Oh, I wouldn't gamble with my wife." And his wife said, "Go ahead, why don't you? You might win. The third time is the charm." So again they played, and again the storyteller lost. And the old man said, "Ah, well, this isn't your lucky day. But maybe now your luck would change. Would you play again?" The storyteller said, "What have I now to gamble with?" The old man said, "Well, you have yourself." So once again they played, and again the storyteller lost. And the old man said, "There now. Now you're mine. Tell me, what would you rather be, a deer or a hare or a hound?" The storyteller said, "I think I'd like to be a hare." The old man took a wand from his pocket and touched the storyteller, and lo and behold you, he became a hare. And he started to run. And his own wife whistled up the hounds, and they chased him around and around and around the meadow. And he ran to his wife for protection, and she pushed him back in front of the hounds. And he ran to the old man for protection, and the old man picked him up and touched him with the wand, and there he was, the storyteller once again. The old man said, "How did you like that sport?" The storyteller said, "I could do without it. The rest of my life I could do without it." Then the old man put his hand into his bag, and he pulled out a little mannequin. He set him on the ground and touched him, and it became a great tall man. He said to him, "You guard my property that I've just won. I'll be back." And he took the storyteller with him. He said, "Now I'm going to touch you with my wand, and no one will be able to see you, but you'll be able to see and hear everything that happens." And he did. After a while they came to the castle of Red Hugh O'Donnell. Now Red Hugh was in bad humour, and he said to one of his pages, "Go out and see is there anyone on the road who might divert me." The page came out, and he saw the old beggar man coming along. He called him in, and he said, "Have you any way of diverting Red Hugh O'Donnell? He's in very bad humour this morning." The beggar man said, "Ah, indeed I have. I have many a trick that would divert him." So he went in. And he said to Red Hugh, "Master, if you give me 5 pieces of silver, I'll show you a fine trick." And he got the silver. He took 3 straws, and he held them in his hand, and he said, "Now I can blow away the middle straw without disturbing the 2 outer ones." And Red Hugh said, "You can't do it." "Ah, yes, I can." And the beggar man put his 2 fingers on the outside straws and blew at the middle one, and of course it blew away. And one of the pages who was standing there said, "There's nothing to that. I could do that myself." And he took 3 straws and put them in his hand, and he held the 2 outer ones and blew at the middle one, and he blew his whole hand off. Then Red Hugh said, "Well, that's an odd trick." The beggar man said, "I have an odder one than that. I can move one ear and not the other." Red Hugh said, "Let me see." "Indeed, master, I'll show you if you give me 7 pieces of silver." And he got the 7 pieces of silver, and he just took his hand and pulled on his right ear. And, of course, his left one didn't move. And another page boy said, "That's a child's trick. Anyone could do that. Sure, I can do it myself." And he put his hand up and pulled his ear, and he pulled his whole head off. And Red Hugh said, "I don't know, do I like this kind of trick?" The beggar man said, "Well, now have patience, master, and I'll show you a fine one." So he took from his bag a hare and a hound and a ball of silk, and he threw the ball up into the air, and it disappeared, leaving the string behind it. And he said to the hare, "Run up there now." And the hare ran. And he said to the hound, "After him now." And the hound ran up the string. And he said to one of the pages, "Would you go after them?" And the page said, "I would." "Go then," the beggar man said, and the page ran up the string. And as he was running, the old man said, "Don't you let anything happen to my hare." Well, after a while, when they hadn't come back, Red Hugh was very much worried. And the old man said, "Don't worry. I think the boy is asleep. And I'm afraid that hound will eat my hare." And he began to tug on the string, and lo and behold you, they came down, and the boy was asleep, and the hare was gone. And the hound was just licking his chops. The beggar man woke up the boy, and he said, "I told you not to let anything happen to my hare, and look at you, you went to sleep. I'll whack your head off." And he did. And Red Hugh said, "Here now, I don't like this at all." The beggar man said, "Well, we've had enough of it." So he took out his wand, and he restored the boy's head, and he restored the other page who had pulled his head off, and he restored the hand to the boy who had blown his hand away. And he said, "There now, master, you've never seen tricks like that, have you?" And Red Hugh said, "No, I never have. And I must admit that I'm diverted. My black mood is gone." And he gave the beggar man a bag of money and sent him on his way. And the storyteller was along with him, although no one could see him. Well, after a while, they came to the king's castle. And the king was very moody. And he was saying to one of his men-in-waiting, "Oh, I'll be glad when evening comes and my storyteller is here and he can tell me a story. I'm very tired of sitting around waiting for him. Look out the door there and see is there anyone coming who might amuse me." And the man went to the door, and all he could see was the beggar man coming down the road, so he called him in. He said, "The king needs diversion. Could you divert him?" The beggar man said, "I could." And he came in. The harpers were playing. And the king said to him, "In all your travels, have you ever heard music like that?" The beggar man listened a minute, and he said, "Oh, King of Leinster, you poor fella, if that's what you call music. Why, compared to that, a nagging wife and a crying child and a yowling cat would make exquisite harmony." Well, the harpers didn't like this criticism of their music, and they ran toward him to beat him, and instead of that, they fell to beating each other. And the place was in a riot. And the king said, "Here, what caused all this?" And the captain of his guard said, "That beggar man did it." The king said, "Take him out and hang him." So they took the beggar man away to the gallows, and they hanged him. And they came back to the king, and lo and behold you, there was the beggar man sitting by the fire, perfectly comfortable. And the captain said, "Didn't I just hang you?" The beggar man said, "Go back to the gallows and see who it was you hanged." And they went back, and there was the king's brother hanging there. They came back, and they found that the king was asleep, and they were so troubled that they wakened him. And they said, "Your Majesty, we just hanged this beggar man, and there he is." The king said, "Oh, why did you wake me up? Hang him again." So they took him out, and they hanged him again. And they got back to the castle, and lo and behold you, there he was ahead of them. And they said, "Didn't we just hang you?" He said, "I don't know. Go see who you hanged." And they went back, and there was the captain's brother hanging. They didn't know what to make of it at all. And they turned to the beggar man, and they said, "Should we hang you a third time?" And he said, "Much good would it do you?" And the captain said, "Run away, will you? Will you disappear from here? Will you go away and never let me lay eyes on you again?" And the beggar man said, "I will. Anything to oblige you." And with that he disappeared, and the storyteller with him. Well, the next thing he knew, the storyteller found himself back in his own meadow, and the beggar man with him. And there was his wife, and there was his horse and chariot, and there were his hounds. And the beggar man touched him with his wand, and he was visible again. And the old man said to him, "There now, here you are back, and here are your possessions. I don't want them." The storyteller said, "Well, I would like to have my horse and my chariot and my hounds, but my wife and my money you can keep. Didn't she set the hounds on me when I was a hare?" And the storyteller said, "Oh, don't blame her for that. I put her under a spell. She couldn't help herself. Take her back." And the storyteller said, "You put her under a spell? Who are you?" "An old man like you." The beggar man said, "I'm not as old as I look, and yet I'm older. I'm Angus of the Brew, and I knew the difficulty you were in this morning, and that's why I came here, to do you a favor, because many a good turn you've done me telling stories about me to the King of Leinster, and good stories too. And now you'll have to admit that you have material for a story tonight and many a night after." And with that he disappeared. Well, the storyteller was happy then. He remembered everything that had happened to him. And he and his wife went back to their castle, and they sat down and they had a good breakfast. And while they were eating, the storyteller was thinking of all that had happened. And he said to his wife, "I have fine stories for the king now." And that night, when he went to the king's castle to tell him a story, he told him everything that had happened when he was with the beggar man. And the king laughed so hard that from that time out, he would listen to no other story. He wanted that one every night. And so the storyteller had no more work to do. He had no more worries. He had plenty of material. And he told that story every night to the king as long as the king lived, and he lived happily. The King of Ireland's son had to leave Fidelma and go find the unique tale. He had no idea in the world where he was going to find someone who could tell him the unique tale. But he was under a debt of honor to the wondersmith to get it and tell it to him. So he started out, and he didn't take his horse or his hound or his hawk. And he walked off sadly, saying, "I will go to the little sage of the mountain. He has helped me before, and maybe he'll help me again." And once more he went to the hill of the fox, and he found the little sage of the mountain, who said to him, "I don't know the unique tale. I can't help you. I have no idea except this. You told me that you had met Laheen the eagle, and she is one of the oldest creatures in Ireland. Find her again. Maybe she'd know." And so the prince started out, not knowing where Laheen might be. But he kept watching the sky, and after a while he saw her. She plummeted to him, and she said, "Where are you off to now, King of Ireland's son?" And he said, "I'm looking for someone to tell me the unique tale. Do you know it? You're one of the oldest creatures in Ireland." She laughed at him and she said, "That may well be, but I don't know what you're looking for. But I wonder now if the old woman of Bear would know. She doesn't know how old she is, and I think she's older than I am. I'll set my wheel rolling in front of you, and it will take you to her." So once again, Laheen set the wheel rolling in front of the king's son, and he followed it. Up hill and down through the valleys and over rivers and over mountains and through forests he followed it. Until at long, long last he came to a wee hut of a house that was set between two enormous pits, and the pits were full of horns. And he thought, could this be it? But the wheel went right up to the door, and when he knocked at the door, an old woman came out, and she saw the wheel, and she said, "I see you've come from Laheen, the eagle." He said, "I have. She told me that you were one of the oldest creatures in Ireland, as she is. And I'm on a quest of honor. I must find the unique tale. Do you know it?" The old woman said, "I know part of it." "Will you tell it to me?" And the old woman said, "I will, but, I wonder how old I am. I wonder if I'm older than Laheen. I'll tell you. The day I was born, and on the anniversary of that day, my father always had a bullock killed, and he threw the horns into these two pits. And after he died, I continued the custom. Now there's a young man over in that pit counting those horns. But if you'll go into this pit and count these horns, then we'll put the two together, and I'll know how old I am. And then when I find that out, my mind will be at ease, and I can tell you the unique tale, what I know of it, that is." So the king's son went into the pit, and he began to count the horns, and he was throwing them out as he was counting them. And one of them went right over the house into the other pit, and he heard a voice called, "Hey, I'm having a hard enough time counting what I have over here. Don't be giving me any more." So he came up, and he went around the back of the house, and he met a young man about his own age who was dressed in a goat skin. And they talked for a minute, and they promised to be careful where they threw the horns. And they went back to their counting. And every once in a while, they'd come up for a rest, and they'd talk. And they got to like each other quite well. And then toward the end of the day, they were almost down to the bottom of the pits, and they came up for a rest. And a wild swan flew over the house, singing. And they were so astonished listening to it that they forgot how many horns they'd counted. And the old woman came out, and she said, "Well, can you tell me how old I am?" And they looked at her blankly, and they said, "We can't." A wild swan went over the house singing, and it wiped our minds clear of all the counting we've done all day. And she threw up her hands, and she said, "It always happens. I'll never find out how old I am." And the king's son was very sad, and he said, "And I'll never find out the unique tale at this rate." And she was so sorry for him, she said, "Oh, you poor boy, if it's that important to you, I'll tell you the part of it that I know. Sit down here now." And they sat down, and she told them a story. She said, there was a king and queen in Ireland one time who had 7 sons and no daughter. And one day they were walking beside a lake. It was a beautiful spring day. And the broom was in bloom, and the yellow was beautiful against the blue of the water. And a white swan came and was swimming on the water, and the queen said, "Ah, look at that. If I had a daughter with eyes as blue as the lake and skin as white as the swan and hair as yellow as the broom, oh, I'd give my 7 sons for her. And the king was furious. He said, don't say things like that. And lo and behold you, in due time she had a daughter. And the day the girl was born, her sons were turned into wild swans. She died of her grief. And the king was so heartbroken, he wouldn't look at the little girl. She was reared in the kitchen with the servants. And all she heard about was this curse that had been put on her 7 brothers. They even called her Sheen, which means storm. Well, one day, she was out picking berries, and she wandered into a bog. And she called for help, and there was no one near to help her. And 7 swans flew over, and she called even to them, and they flew down, and she heard one of them say, oh, it's a girl. If it were anyone but a girl, we could help. She looked at them and she said, girl or no girl, help me, I'll drown in this bog. And they said, we can't help you. It was because of a girl that we were turned into swans. And she said, I'm the girl who caused it, and my whole life has been made sorry because of it. Take me out of here, and then we can talk. And with that, the swans flew down, and they lifted her out and carried her to dry land. And she said, my mother died of her grief, and my father has locked himself away from the world in his grief. Is there anything I could do that would restore you? And they said, there is, but it would be impossible. You couldn't do it. She said, tell me what it is. I'll do anything. I'll try anything. And they said, well, you would have to collect the bog cotton that grows here and spin it into thread and weave it into cloth and make a shirt of it for each of us. You could make only 1 shirt a year. And in all that time, you would never smile or laugh or cry or speak. And Sheen said, I'll do it. I'll do it if it kills me. So they took her then to a house in the forest. And the woman there accepted her and thought that she was mute, because Sheen would say nothing, and she never laughed or smiled or cried. But every day after her work was done, she would go out onto the bog and she'd gather all the fluff that she could get, and she'd come back and she'd spin it and she'd weave it. She had 6 shirts made, and she was out gathering the down for the 7th one when the king of that country saw her. She was so lovely that he decided she should be his queen, and he followed her home. But she wouldn't talk to him. She wouldn't smile at him. She sat there spinning her bog down, and he talked to the spae woman with whom she lived, who told him that she was just a benighted creature who had come to her, and she didn't talk. The king said, I don't care whether she talks. I'll take her anyway. And he took her. And as he lifted her to carry her out to his horse, Sheen lifted the shirts that she had made, and she took her bag of down and her spindle, and she wouldn't part with them. The king was sad because she wouldn't talk or smile, but he loved her. He married her, and she would have been happy, except that his sisters were very jealous of her. When she would go out to gather more bog down, they would follow her and spy on her. And they kept saying to their brother the king, this woman you have married is a witch She's no ordinary mortal. Now it happened that the king was away hunting when she had a baby boy. And when she was sleeping, the king's sisters stole the baby. And they took him to an old henwife who lived nearby. And they said, get rid of him. And went back to the castle. And when the king returned, they met him at the door and they said, we told you that you had married a witch. She had a beautiful son while you were gone, and the child has disappeared. And there she sits, weaving, and now she's sewing, and there's not a tear in her eye, and she has just destroyed your son. And the king went to Sheed and said, tell me, speak, tell me what has happened. What are they saying about you? And she wouldn't answer him. She was sewing on the last of the shirts. And he insisted. He said, if you don't tell me, I'll have you burned as a witch. And with that she began to cry. And as soon as the tears came down her cheeks and dropped onto the cloth she was sewing, it turned into bog down and blew away. And as the 6 shirts that were sitting beside her all blew away. And when she realized that her long labor was ruined, she said to the king, do you see what you've done? I was not to speak or cry or laugh or even smile until I had the 7 shirts made and I could rescue my brothers. And those wicked sisters of yours, it was they who stole my child. The king went to his sisters, and when they saw the anger in his face, they fled, and he never saw them again. And he couldn't find his son. And Sheen didn't know what had happened to him. What else could she do? Her work was ruined. She couldn't start it again. And she said to her husband, all I can hope now is that someday I will find a way to rescue my brothers. And so, now she could talk and smile. But there weren't many smiles in her. She was so sad. And the old woman of Bear stopped. And the king's son said, is there more? She said, oh yes. There's a finish to this tale. But I don't know it. This is as much as I know. Before he could even turn sad, the young man who'd been counting the other pit of horns spoke up and he said, don't give up hope. I think I know the rest of this story. And the old woman turned to him and she said, what's your name? He said, they call me Gilly of the Goatskin, because I have always worn this goatskin. She said, I could put a name to you. Take off the goatskin. And the Gilly dropped the goatskin and she said, you see those stars on your chest? And he looked down, he'd never noticed them before. She said, those stars would indicate to me that you are a king's son. I'll put a name to you. I will call you Flann. And the Gilly sat back and he said, I seem to have heard that name. Is it my name? And the old woman of Bear said, I think it is. And with those stars, where did you come from? And Flann began to talk and he said, I don't quite know. But I do know this, that up until a short time ago, I lived with 3 hags of women in the forest. And they never called me anything but Gilly of the goatskin, and they never spoke to me, but they used to talk about me. They kept me in a cradle as though I were a baby, all those years, and I used to listen to what they said. I heard one of them say one day, "It's a good thing he has no sense, because if he ever takes a piece of an ash tree toward us and throws it at us, he could get away." And I wondered what they were talking about. They used to weave baskets for a living, and sometimes they brought in twigs from the ash trees to strengthen the baskets. And one day when they were out, I managed to get some of them into my hand. And I tipped the cradle and I hid behind it. And when they came in, I stood up. And they hadn't realized how tall I'd grown, and they were frightened. And one of them said to the other 2, "Is that an ash plant he has?" And they realized that they'd been careless and had left these ash twigs around where I could get one. And with that, I threw it at them. And the magic in the ash plant made them fall down insensible. And so I got away. But I don't know where I came from or how I came to be living with those 3 hags. And the old woman of Bear said, "I know. I can tell where you came from. I think you were Sheen's baby. I'm sure of it, because why else would you have the stars on your breast? And how else would you be living with the 3 hags? Wouldn't they be the hen wife and the king's 2 sisters who were hiding from his wrath? And wouldn't it just suit them to hide a king's son when they were jealous of Sheen?" And Flann sat back and he thought, but he was only an infant when they took him. How could he remember? The King of Ireland's son spoke up and he said, "You know, there's one person who could tell us. The Spey woman. We'll find her. We'll ask her. She took care of Sheen." And Flann rose up to his feet and he said, "I will be your companion until we find her. Because while you want the rest of the unique tale, I want to find out who I am." Well, the old woman of Bear sat there and looked at them and she said, "Isn't that like true young men? Here, all I want to know in the world is how old I am. And you 2 are going off on some fool's quest. And you wouldn't stay here and count those horns the way I'd know how many years I have?" And they looked at her and they smiled and they said, "Old woman of Bear, can youth be held back?" But they promised that when they found what they wanted to know, they'd come back and count the horns for her. Flann knew pretty well where to find the Spey woman. And they set off back along the river on which he had traveled before he came to the house of the old woman of Bear. And they found the little house beside the bog where the bog cotton grew, and they went in, and there was the Spey woman. And they told her their problem. And she said, "I don't know. I never saw Sheen's baby. You might be she." And then the King of Ireland's son said, "Tell me, what happened to Sheen?" The Spey woman said, "Oh, She's the queen, your stepmother. And he said, is there some way we could rescue her brothers? The Spey woman said, there is. Flann here could do it. If he would find a girl who loved him so much that she would give him 7 drops of her heart's blood, we could get those wild swans back to their own human form. And Flann looked at her and he said, my experience of women is very slight. The love I have known would be nothing. But I will search. If I search the world over, till I find a girl who will give me 7 drops of her heart's blood, and then I will go and find my mother. And the Spey woman said, never mind. I'll bring your mother here and you come back to me. So the 2 young men went off, and I hope that next week we'll tell you whether Flann found a young woman who loved him enough to give him 7 drops of her heart's blood. Until then, goodbye now. You remember last week, Flann, whom we knew as Gilly of the Goatskin, set out to find a girl who would give him 7 drops of her heart's blood with which he could bring his uncles out of their enchantment. That's where we left him. Of course, he had no idea of where to go to find such a person. And he thought, I'll go back to the river. It always leads me somewhere. He went back to the river, and he was walking along beside the river when suddenly he felt himself lifted into the air. And who had him? The giant Crumb Dove had captured him. And he held Flann tightly and he said, you're just what I'm looking for. I need a good, strong young man to help me mix the mortar for a wall that I'm building to protect my wondrous tree. Of course, Flann had no idea where he was going. He had heard of Crumb Dove, but he had hoped never to meet him. And before very long, since Crumb Dove could take such big steps, they arrived at his castle. And they went through the gate, and Flann could see a great line of cattle waiting to be milked. And he could hear someone with a very sweet voice talking to them. And Crumb Dove said, you hear her? That's my other servant. She's my milkmaid. Then he showed Flann the wall he was building. He said, I mix my mortar in a special way. I mix it with milk and bullock's blood. I kill a bullock every day to eat, and I throw the skin over that back wall, and I eat the flesh, and I use the blood in my mortar. And that will be your job, to help me. And don't try to escape me. If you go out the front gate, I have a ferocious bull out there who will kill you. If you go over the back wall, there's a moat full of poisoned water. It will kill you if you touch it. You cannot escape, and don't try. Well, Flann decided he'd have to make the best of it. And he went into the kitchen. And after a while, the milkmaid came in. And she said, my name is Morag, and who are you and how did you get here? And Flann told her. And he looked at her. She had a beautiful voice. You could listen to it forever. But she certainly was not the most beautiful girl in Ireland. And he said, how did you come to be here? And she told him. She said, the queen of my country sent me under Gaza. You remember, that's a debt of honor. To bring her a berry from that wonderful tree that Crumb Dove has. Anyone who eats that berry will become beautiful. And the queen wants one, and she sent me to get it. And Flann said, well, what's the matter? Can't you climb the tree? And Morag said, I could climb the tree indeed, but look out at it. and he looked at it, and here were 24 ferocious-looking cats hunkering in the tree. She said, those cats would take you to pieces if you went near that tree. And do you know that they're the best watchmen that Crum Dubh has? I daren't make a move, but he knows it, and I'm sure it's the cats who tell him. Well, the next morning, Flann began to help the giant mix the mortar for his wall. And they worked all morning. And in the afternoon, the giant said, well, that's enough for today. I'm going away, and I'll be gone for a night and a day. You see to it that you're here when I come back. Don't try to get away. And he left. Flann went into Morag and he said, I'm going over the back wall. I'm going to see what this poisoned moat is like. She said, well, the cats will tell. But wait, I have a trick that might distract them. And she took a mirror and began to flash lights from the sun on the castle with the mirror. They looked like birds flying. And as one, the cats turned their heads and watched these lights. And while they were fascinated by them, Flann got over the back wall. And there was the moat. And the water looked poisonous. It had a scum on it. And he thought, now how could I get across there? And while he was watching, he saw a fox. The fox came and picked up one of the bullock's hides that were lying there in a pile, and he dropped that into the water and swam, pushing it ahead of him. And the bullock's skin absorbed all the poison. So Flann went back over the wall, and he said to Morag, I've discovered the secret of how to get across that moat, and we'll go. And she said, I can't go until I get that berry for the queen. And they looked out, and the cats were back, roosting in the tree. Now, Morag had a pet, a little red hen, who was walking around at a very dignified rate and pecking. And she walked over to the well, and she seemed to be pecking especially hard. And Flann said, look at the wee thing. It looks as though she would tell us something. And they walked over to the well, and lo and behold you, there was a great bed of catnip. And Flann said, this will take care of your cats. And he picked the catnip and he crushed it so that the odor from it would reach the cats. And he threw it as far as he could. And as soon as the cats smelled it, they came down from the tree in a great rush and went for the catnip. And they began to play and jump and roll around. They were paying no attention to anything Flann and Morag were doing. And Flann said, I'll climb the tree. I'll get you the berry. And he started up the tree. And as he did, Morag said in a very small voice, Flann, no one has ever even suggested that I might be beautiful. Would you bring me a berry too? And he laughed and promised. And he came down from the tree with 2 berries. And Morag ate one. And before his very eyes, she began to change. And it was no time at all until she was the most beautiful creature he'd ever looked at. Well, the cats were still busy with their catnip. And Flann and Morag went over the back wall, and each one of them took a bullock's hide and pushed it across the moat and swam over safely. And before very long, they were out of the territory where Crum Dubh had any power. Now, they started back toward the Spey woman's house. And all the time Flann was telling his story to Morag. And he said, if I could only find some girl who would love me enough to give me 7 drops of blood from her heart, I could restore my uncles. Here they've been wild swans for all these years. And all these years I've been a prisoner of the 3 hags, and I never knew who my mother was until the Spey woman told me. But now she's the Queen of Ireland. And Morag said, "Don't worry about it. I'm sure you will get what you need." When they arrived at the Spey woman's house, they were received, of course, with great rejoicing. But Morag wouldn't stay. She said, "Oh, no, I'm under Gaza to get this berry to the Queen, and I must get it to her as soon as possible." And she left. But as she was going, she pressed something into Flan's hand. She said, "Give this to your mother when she arrives." And off she went. And he was so downhearted at her going that he went around to the back of the house and he sat down and slumped into a heap, and he'd pay no attention to anything. Well, the next morning there was a great ree-raw coming from the forest, and here came the king and the queen and the king's son and Fidelma and all their attendants coming to the Spey woman's house. She rushed out to meet them. She greeted the Queen because she remembered her as a girl when her name had been Sheen and she had had such trouble. And she said, "Do you know, I have found your son. I have found the son that you lost in your youth." And Cantigern jumped down from the horse she was riding and said, "How do you know it's he?" The Spey woman said, "I know. He has the stars on his chest that proclaim him a king's son." She went around to the back of the house then, and she roused Flan out of his seeming stupor. And he came around, and he saw the Queen standing there, and as you looked from the Queen to Flan, there was no mistaking it. The son looked so much like his mother that anyone could tell they belonged together. And the king came up, and he recognized his son, especially by the stars that were on his chest. He said, "This I know is my son. This is something that happened. It has happened to my ancestors, and here it has happened again. This must be my long-lost son." Flan put his hand into his pocket then, and he took out this little gift that Morag had given him. And he said to the Queen, "My mother, since you are my mother, this was left for you by a girl I have lost, the most beautiful girl in Ireland." And the mother opened it, and here it was a little linen handkerchief, and there were 7 blood spots on it. And with that, the Spey woman gave a great shout of joy, and she said, "This is what you need to restore your brothers." She took a cake that she had just baked on the hearth, and she cut 7 pieces from it. She cut each of the little blood spots out of the handkerchief and wet them at her mouth and put them inside the bread. And then she said to the Queen, "Go into the forest and call. Call as loud as you can till your brothers come to you." And the Queen called and called for a long time, and at last the 7 wild swans came to her, and she led them back to the Spey woman's house and fed them the bits of bread. And there before her eyes they changed. They changed into kneeling men with their arms behind their backs. And it was a long time before any movement came into their arms and their legs, and they were able to stand up. She was shocked to find that they were old men. She had expected them to be as young as they were when they had been enchanted in the first place. And they sat down on a bench by the door in the sun, and they waited for speech to return. And after a while it did. And then they were able to greet their sister and thank her for restoring them after all these years. Again, there was cause for rejoicing. But Flan couldn't join in the gaiety at all. All he could do was long for his Morag. And the Spey woman assured him, "You must not worry. If it is meant to be that she should be your wife, she will come back to you. And Flann said, no, I'm afraid of it. When she gets back to her own country and they see how beautiful she has become, they'll keep her there. They won't let her come back to Ireland. And none of the reassuring words that everyone was saying to him seemed to register. The king's son came to him and he said, Flann, Gilly of the Goatskin, whatever your name is, don't you realize that it is now known that we are brothers? Do you want me to go and find this Morag for you? Flann said, you wouldn't do it. You couldn't do it. You couldn't leave Fidelma. He seemed to be doubtful that he would ever be happy in this world at all. And the king's son said, wait. Put me under Gaza if you like, but once I have gone to the wondersmith and told him the rest of the unique tale, I will go. I will find your Morag. And Flann was considering this. And he said, if you go looking for her, I could go back to the old woman of Bear and I could count those horns for her and find out how old she is. That's the thing she wants to make her happy. The king's son wondered. He said, I don't know if it would make her happy to know how old she is. She likes to have something to puzzle about. But we'll go back, and we'll see if that's what she wants. And anyway, she ought to know the rest of the unique tale. She knows only a part of it. And this finish of it would give her something to think about the rest of her life, no matter how long she lives. So with that, they thanked the Spey woman, and they started out to find the old woman of Bear. And they were singing and laughing and telling stories all the way, all except Flann. They could not bring him out of his ill humor. They could not make him stop worrying. And when they got to the house of the old woman of Bear, she was very much excited to have so much company, and such grand company too, all at once. And they offered to count the horns for her, and she said, oh, no. If I ever knew how old I am, I wouldn't be able to argue with Laheen. As it is now, she doesn't know how old I am, and I don't know, and so I can claim to be older than she. And if you were to tell me how old I am, look how you would disarm me in an argument. So they sat around and they told her the rest of their adventures. And this made her happy. She was glad to know the rest of the unique tale. They started out then, when they left her, to go to the house of Gubansur, the wondersmith, because the king's son, as you remember, was under Gaza to tell him the unique tale, all of it. And when they reached the forge, the wondersmith greeted them, and he knew that now he was going to hear the tale that he wanted, because surely the king's son would never have come back without it, and he under Gaza to get it. And they sat down, and once again the king's son told him the unique tale and all that came after. And when he had finished, the wondersmith said, I'm going to reward you. And he went into the forge, and when he came back, he was bearing in his hand the sword of light. And he said, I'll give it to you. Treasure it. Keep it bright. And the king's son said, how do I keep it bright? Isn't it always that way? And the smith shook his head, and he said, no. Only while you are true and just and kind and gay will it be bright. If you go against any of these things, it will darken and lose its power. And under those conditions, the king's son accepted the sword of light. because he knew that one day he would be King of Ireland and he would need this weapon. They were just about to set out then, and Flann still with them, with a face on him as long as today and tomorrow, claiming that his heart was breaking in his chest and objecting to all their gaiety, when who should come into the forge but Morag? Why, she lighted the place as if there were two fires going with her beauty. And they all stood up to greet her, not knowing who she was at all. And Flann could hardly believe his eyes as he ran to her and said, "You were coming back. They let you go." And she said, "Oh, yes, I told you that you must never worry." When the Queen got her magic berry and ate it, she became so beautiful that no one noticed me, and I was able to slip away. And I was just on my way back to the Spey woman's house, and I passed by here, and I saw the King and the Queen, and I knew that you must be somewhere near. Well, that was the end of Flann's ill humor. He was the gayest of them all on their way back to the king's palace. And when they reached the King of Ireland's palace, you may well believe me that there was great excitement. And the king sent for all of his friends from the country around, from the neighboring kings and the heads of clans. And they gathered at the palace for the wedding feast, because this was to be a double wedding. Fidelma and the king's son, of course, he had fulfilled his Gaza now. He had found the unique tale and he had told it to the wondersmith. Morag and Flann had been through enough adventures so that they appreciated the calm of home. I'll tell you that wedding feast lasted 8 days and 9 nights, and the 9th night was gayer than the first night. And if you had been there, I think you would have done just as I did. I ate so much I couldn't walk home. I had to put my feet into my mouth and roll home like a hoop. And that's the story of the King of Ireland's son. Now you'll find this book in the library. It's called The King of Ireland's Son, and it was written by Padraig Colum. Now in these 4 story hours, we have touched only the high spots. In this book, you will find the story of the King of the Cats. You'll find stories from the Craneskin book. You'll find many stories that we haven't been able to touch on here because, after all, our time is limited. But Padraig Colum is a man who loves to write books for children. He doesn't write only Irish books, although he's an Irishman, and his Irish books are very good. And in this one book, The King of Ireland's Son, he has collected many of the favorite Irish tales. Right next to it on the library shelf, you're likely to find a book of his called The Forge in the Forest. He has books written on Greek themes, and I know from Story Hour that you like the Greek myths, and he has done them very nicely. You go to your librarian in the children's room at your library and you say, "I would like to read about the King of Ireland's son," and ask her to take you to the shelf where Padraig Colum's books are, C-O-L-U-M. And I think that no matter what your particular interest in stories will be, you will find that Padraig has covered it in one or the other of his books. Oh, I hope you'll go now and get acquainted with him. He did a book for grown-ups, too, called Irish Folklore. And even in that, you will find something that you'll like.